There are moments that we all look back on and go, oh, I remember where I was when, or do you remember this or that? You know, these monumental events that affect so many people, it kind of strikes that date in your mind forever. Obviously, you know, 9/11 is one of those. Where were you on 9/11? If you were in existence, which some of us in the room were not yet. But that's the idea. There was, a couple weeks ago, something similar, at least if you traveled, CrowdStrike, or Source or Strike or whatever it was, CrowdStrike, that's too close to what it did. It struck the crowd. But when we were traveling a couple weeks ago with some friends, you know, we were delayed at least 12 hours. Anybody that was traveling got delayed. Some of the friends that we were with were delayed several days. And for those that traveled, they were saying, this is unlike any other kind of breakdown in the system that they had experienced. And you might say, you remember where you were when, or you just remember events. You don't even necessarily remember exactly when they were, but on June 18th, so almost, or just over a year ago in 2023, remember Titan, the submersible, the submarine? Remember that story? Just an awful story. You just can't forget like that story. You might not remember when it was, but you remember thinking back about this company that had these high ambitions, OceanGate, to go on a journey to in this miniature submarine that they made to go down and see the wreck of the Titanic in the North Atlantic. And it just so happens that when they went, they were moving towards it, and the pressure hull had imploded while Titan was descending, and it resulted in the instantaneous death of all 5 people on board. You raise your hand if you remember Titan, right? I just remember hearing that story and going, what is wrong with people? Like, I would never even go on that thing ever. Like, I would never go on ever. You couldn't, like, I ran it all the way through. Like, you would have to tell me, like, I would not go on that trip for $1 billion. You know that? Like, no, you could be like, no, you will get $1 billion. No, I'm not going on that trip. Not going on that trip. Like, the only way I would go on that trip is if it was to save the life of one of my kids. And that's just one. I don't know about the other 2. It's like, it'd be a tough. It's a toss-up, right? Like, I would never go on that. And that's when, remember how the guy that ran it invited his son on for like a birthday present, and the kid didn't want to go. And he kind of, come on, let's go. And then this happens. Just heartbreaking. Like, what was interesting too about when they looked into the OceanGate executives, they didn't seek out any type of certification, arguing that excessive safety protocols and regulations would hinder innovation. Famous last words, right? Would you ever send your kid on an experimental trip to the bottom of the North Atlantic? No. Would you ever send your kid on an experimental trip to Mars? There's lots of talk about Mars right now. I mean, Elon Musk is saying 1% of the world's budget should be spent on other planets. 1%. You might think he's thinking more, but he's saying that's plenty. We don't need to spend tons of time on it, but we need to make sure that we're looking at it. But mainly, we need to make this place the best it can be. But there's conversations about potentially generations from now moving to Mars, and who are going to be the forerunners, who are going to be the heroes that went out first on the expedition, right? The explorers. Imagine it that they said, we're going to do an experimental trip to Mars, and we want to see how kids adapt to the different gravitational realities on Mars. They said, your kid could be the first. Kind of like maybe Willy Wonka, right? There's gonna be 5 golden tickets and you get to go to Mars. I mean, would you be lining up to see if you could get that ticket so you could send your kid to Mars so that they would go? And you start to think about this, it's kind of a silly thing to even consider. I mean, the dangers are they're obvious, right? Similar to Titan, I would rather go to space though than to the bottom of the ocean if I had to pick one. But it's basically the same. And you're gonna go out into a vast nothingness with, just this kind of insane reality. And then if you even get to Mars, then the gravitational pull is 38% of what it is here. And they're saying, no, we wanna see how your kids, if they're in that environment while their bones are growing, maybe they'll adapt better than the adults that go there if they hadn't been raised there. And you're thinking, just stop talking, because we're not doing this. Oh, there is a chance that if your kid is on Mars and there's no atmosphere like on Earth, and so there's certain ions and rays that are coming through. We don't know how they're gonna adjust to that. Of course, the gravitational pull, they could have deformities. You wanna go? Let's go. I know there are some people, right, who love this idea, right? Those guys that wear the suits and they fly off of mountains with a death wish, right? They just wanna experience some type of crazy thing. I think those are 90% of them die in an accident, which is hard to say it's an accident if you just keep doing it, right? Most of us would not ever do that. We would never send our kids. But here's today's message, just to open up, just to breach the subject of the world that we're actually living in. What if we are, in a manner of speaking, and we don't know it? What if we already are exposing our kids to a level of danger, both physically, mentally, emotionally, already, almost every single one of us, and we don't even know it? And the data would say that we probably are, as it's related to this. So we're gonna talk about this. We're gonna talk about what this means. So I want you to take a moment and take your phone out. Get a hold of it in your hand. You have it, don't you? Or it has you, let's be honest. And I'm gonna ask you to do something that's a little bit bizarre. I want you to take it and put it on its face underneath your chair. I'll put mine right here. Now, if you need it because someone needs to contact you or you need to contact somebody, don't put it under there. But just put it under there and let's just try to go for the next 25 minutes. Just with that thing out of sight, out of mind, on its face. And let's see what this does. What I'm gonna be doing here is activating these addictive habits that you all have already. And you're gonna start to be panicking that you can't lift up your phone. But maybe by the end of this, you'll go, okay, I probably need to figure that out. I started reading this book, The Anxious Generation. This is the latest and greatest research done on Generation Z, the first generation to be raised on smartphones and with these screens. Generation Z is late 90s to early 2000s being born. And a lot of what I'm gonna be reading today and experts is from this. But it gives tons of data, and ironically, I had to borrow this book from someone's office because I don't read paper books. I only read on a screen. The irony is thick. But I also do audio books, right? So about a month ago or so, I was listening to part of this book, and it really struck me. And I was picking up both of our boys from their basketball camp that they do all summer. And we're driving in the car, and I made them listen to about a 12-minute section. I said, hey guys, I want you to listen to this. And there was a bunch of data about the problems of social media and how it's affecting kids, some of which I'll share with you today. But, it's very intense data, new research, very, sophisticated work that's been done to find out causes and correlations with all these different problems that, the youngest generation is experiencing. We pull up to the house after about 12 minutes, and I turn it off, and I turn to my boys, and I'm like, what do you think? And my 13-year-old goes, I already know all that. And I'm thinking, first of all, no, you don't. You don't know all that. It's all brand new research. You haven't read the book. You don't know all that. Like, But what he was saying is, I go, what do you mean? You know that? He says, that's why I don't have my phone with me all night. That's why I don't, and we've talked to our boys about the phone in their room, and I'm gonna talk more about that throughout the series. But they've already started to make those things because we've shared with them that there's real danger in overuse. But when I said that to Kellen and to Jet, I could see that they thought that maybe I was telling them that they were doing something wrong. And I said this to them, and I think it's important that you hear this from me and that we understand this. I said, I'm not sharing this information with you because I think you are doing something wrong. I'm sharing this information with you because I think maybe I have done something wrong. I want us to understand together what the phone is doing and how to move forward in a healthy way. The way that we use cell phones and the way we have let our kids use them may be more harmful than an experimental trip to Mars. Let me share with you why I say that. And again, lots of people have been asking about this book, The Anxious Generation by Jonathan Haidt. You can YouTube his stuff. You can read this book. Go ahead and read through it for this series. It will be helpful. At the turn of the millennia, technology companies that were based, we know them, on the West Coast in the United States created a set of world-changing products that took advantage of the internet, fast-growing internet. And there was wide shared sense of techno-enthusiasm and optimism, right? It was like, this is exciting. This is great. The products that were made life more fun, easier, and helped us connect. And I was one of those people. I was one of those guys that was standing out in front of the Apple store in the line, in the rain, in 2007 when the first one came out, and then when the 3G came out, and then when the 4, and then when the 5. I was the one that was doing that. I love technology a lot. Like if you ask any of my friends, like I'm a tech, they're like, you really like technology. I love technology. I think it's so cool to make things easier, but I was one of them. And what we didn't understand is they weren't just transforming life for adults, they were transforming life for children too. And many parents right around that time were relieved to find out that they could take an iPad or a screen and hand it to their kid, and their kid could just kind of sit quietly, mesmerized by the images and the audio on a screen for hours at a time, thinking, well, this is great. It's like I got a babysitter that's only like $99 a month, right? And that's the way a lot of us felt. We truly did. But none of us really knew if it was safe. Nobody knew because everyone was doing it. It was ubiquitous. I mean, and it still is more than then. But there was not a conversation. Is this safe? Is this good? Should we be doing this? Everyone was just in. And the companies had done little to no research on the mental health effects of these products. And then when they started to get faced with, certain negativity and allegations that their products were potentially harming people, they were in denial. And what happened is the companies, they started to learn about certain products and the way that people were engaging, and the trouble and the use of them became exponential in the algorithms that were put together that were used to engage people specifically in the habits that were being formed. Companies, they strove to maximize, to use psychological tricks to keep young people clicking and scrolling. They created habit-forming algorithms to stimulate addiction. This included social media, which was kind of the greatest in terms of all of them, in terms of making people go through harmful realities. It caused the greatest damage on girls. And the video game companies and the pornography sites caused the greatest problems in boys. And they designed this addictive content that was entering in through our kids' eyes and ears. And it was kind of this display of physical engagement that was displacing actual physical play and in-person socializing. And effectively, kids had their brains rewired to what is called in this space a rewiring of the childhood brain. And it affected kids from a developmental perspective at an unimaginable scale. The cost of using social media in particular is much higher for adolescents than compared to adults. You see, the reward-seeking parts of the brain mature much earlier. The frontal cortex, essential for self-control, delay of gratification, and resistance to temptation, is not up to full capacity until we're in our mid-20s. And so preteens are particularly vulnerable at this point in development. Just as they begin puberty, they are kind of socially insecure, and they're easily swayed by peer pressure and easily lured by an activity that seems to give them social validation. It's just kind of too much. It's like the gates are being formed, but they're not there yet, so all of the information, it's getting through. And it's doing more damage, they're finding, than good. The idea here would be, can we let our kids at least grow up on Earth before we send them to Mars? As their social lives have increasingly moved online, the contrast access to social media, video gaming, and other internet activities, this is the first generation of teens in the United States to go through adolescence with this level of connectivity and has become more anxious, depressed, and suicidal than any other generation recorded before them. In a U.S. national survey on drug use and health, the data revealed a staggering 145% increase in reported cases of depressive episodes among girls since 2012. For boys, the rise is even more pronounced, with a 161% increase in reported cases of depressive episodes in the same period. And the impact extends way beyond self-reported symptoms, with college students receiving a 134% increase in anxiety, 106% increase in depression, a 72% increase in ADHD, and a 57% increase in bipolar disorder diagnosis since 2012. Among girls, there has been a 188% increase in emergency room visits for self-harm since 2010, and a 167% rise in suicide rates. For boys, the numbers are also alarming, with a 48% increase in self-harm and 91% surge in suicide rates. And of course, all of those people doing the research are asking the question, what accounts for this dramatic shift in the mental landscape for Gen Z? And they have found some things, but they have revealed, and it has been determined, that the main reason for the widespread change is the adoption of smartphones. It's the adoption of smartphones and the corresponding changes in the social fabric of adolescence. Smartphones that were first introduced in 2007 have profoundly influenced the way young people interact, communicate, and engage the world around them. Studies have shown that tweens and teens who access the internet in the 1990s and early 2000s were on average slightly happier during their adolescence than their Gen X predecessors. However, this trend reversed dramatically with the widespread adoption of smartphones, which enabled adolescents to be connected online constantly wherever they were. By 2016, 79% of teens owned a smartphone, as did 28% of children 8 to 12. Alarmingly, in a Pew study in 2022, the report indicates a 46% of teens describing themselves as being online almost constantly. This shift in the social landscape of children and adolescents
often referred to as the great rewiring of childhood, has had a significant impact on Gen Z's mental health. Bottom line, the introduction of the smartphone has fundamentally altered the nature of childhood, depriving children of the critical experiences of free play, attunement, and organic social learning. 4 key ways in which these technologies have eroded the traditional foundations of a healthy childhood are through social deprivation, sleep deprivation, attention fragmentation, and addiction. The reality is, the unbridled use of a cell phone is a hindrance to healthy growth for children. The unbridled use of cell phones is a hindrance to the healthy growth of children. We need to stop and recognize that. Now, this is not a series that's like a change the nation series. Like, I don't believe that we're gonna make some kind of ripple that necessarily changes the whole culture that we live in, but I can tell you what, we in this community can make changes. We can make an adjustment. We can have a community and a culture here that says we've made some adjustments because we're not satisfied with just being normal, because normal over time can be a disaster waiting to happen. And what's true for kids is in ways true for everyone. The unbridled use of a cell phone is a hindrance to adult purity, sanity, and peace. Now, if these things are a hindrance to a child's growth, like sending them to Mars, wouldn't you say that probably they're a hindrance to just all the great things life has to offer? When you think about a hindrance, like if a cell phone is in their hand and it's what they're paying attention to, don't you think that that's taking away their attention from a lot of wonderful things? Right? I mean, if they're spending all that time there, what are they missing out there? What are they missing? What are we doing to stop them from engaging with their friends and engaging in certain activities and sports and to learn certain things and to be physically fit and to be socially fit and to not have addictive qualities that they're kind of building? John Mark Comer, he defines worship with the word attention. What we pay attention to is what we're worshiping. That's why you use the word pay, because your attention, what you focus on, what you put your eyes on, what you study, what you engage, what you give your energy to, that's a cost. It's a pay. I'm paying. I have my attention. It infers my attention matters. What I pay attention to matters. We know this when we're married, right? Because if you don't pay attention, that's a problem. If she doesn't think you're listening, it means that what you're paying your attention to, that must mean more. You're investing more there than here. So he says that payment of your attention is worship. So what do you pay most attention to? Do we pay most of our attention to good things? Or if aliens came to this planet right now and watched us, would they think that these things are in control of us? If these things are taking away our attention from the good things, they're certainly taking our attention away from the things of God. And that's really, honestly, the way that the enemy works. You understand? There's a real devil, and he is really up to stealing from you, killing you, and destroying your life. That's like what his thing is. Like, that's my thing. Like, that's his tattoo. I want to kill you. I want to destroy whatever you've got. I want to steal everything that matters to you. But he doesn't do it in this kind of robust outward fashion. All he does is make it so that you're not worshiping Christ. As long as you're not worshiping God, he doesn't care what else you're worshiping. Kinlaw said it this way. He said, Satan disguises submission to himself under the ruse of personal autonomy. He never asks us to become his servants. Never once did the serpent say to Eve, I want to be your master. The shift in commitment is never from Christ to evil. It is always from Christ to anything but Christ. And instead of his will, self-interest. What you want now rules and it reigns. And that's the essence of sin. The enemy wants us to pay less attention to Jesus, and he doesn't care what helps. But the reality of the life of Jesus, his reason for coming to earth, first of all, the precedent is just, it's totally radical that he would come to earth, that the maker of heaven and earth, any notion of God throughout human history is he's better than us, he's higher than us, we're servants of him. You know, it's implied, he's God, we're not. We better give ourselves to him and sacrifice animals to him, and we better appease him so he doesn't destroy us. And that was the nature of God. Jesus shows up, he leaves all that he has to come here, and not just to come here, to bind himself with us, to connect with us through holiness, to connect with every single one of us so that we would be transformed. Implication, he loves us enough. We've been deformed. We've been, made unlike him through certain practices and what we've connected to. He wants us to disconnect from that and connect to him so that he can reform or transform us into the humans we were always designed to be. The only way this happens is through connectivity. It's through connectivity. You have to be connected to Jesus to be transformed by Jesus. What are you connected to? What you're connected to is what's forming you. Phones are forming us. Phones are forming our kids. Now the question becomes, when we identify that has a real potential problem, that phone, that could really mess us up. I mean, the data's there. There's no other causation. That's the problem. It's a major source of a problem. The question then becomes, what, as parents, as adults, as those responsible, what are we responsible for? Are we hindering kids from connecting to Jesus? Now we agree, we might be, by handing them this phone, we might be responsible for hindering them to connect to something, right? Because we're saying, connect to this. You're like, well, I never said that. Yeah, you didn't have to say it. You did it. You said, here it is, and you said, you're gonna connect to that. And then they did. So by us having them connect so much to that, are we hindering their connection from good things? From God? This is something that has been asked, and this idea is not new. This is addressed in the life of Christ. In all three synoptic gospels, there is a story where Jesus is present and people are bringing their children to Jesus. And this is what it says in Matthew. Then people brought little children to Jesus for him to place his hands on them and to pray for them. But the disciples rebuked them. Jesus said, let the little children come to me and do not hinder them, for the kingdom of heaven belongs to such as these. When he had placed his hands on them, he went from there. I just want you to notice a couple things about this first. Who hinders the children from getting to Jesus? The disciples, right? Do we know who the disciples are? The disciples are the closest followers to Jesus. They're the ones who know him most, have spent the most time with him. They left their nets, they left their jobs to become like this rabbi. And they're supposed to understand what he's all about. And they're the ones who go, no, get the kids away. Now, some of it's understandable in that time frame. Kids aren't viewed the way they ought to be viewed. They're kind of like second-class citizens and really viewed as a nuisance, not the kind we know they can be, but really it's like they're viewed as this kind of irritating project that if we don't get right, they'll just mess everything up. So kids are viewed as a tremendous amount of work and kind of a nuisance. And so what Jesus says here is way more profound than what I face. Oh, Jesus loves children, all the little children. He loves Jesus. Everybody loves Jesus. Bring all the kids to Jesus. He just loves them and the lamb and the kids, and it's pretty. I want you to notice something that if you stop and read what kind of statement Jesus makes here. You know, a lot of people take this passage to mean that we need to have hearts like children. We need to be sensitive like children. We need to include the children in the things of God. But Jesus makes a way bigger statement than that. He's not making a psychological statement about the way adults feel and how kids are pure. He's not making a mental statement. He is making a political statement. And it has nothing to do with the way kids think and the way adults feel. It has everything to do with their bodies. Their bodies. Jesus is saying, humans that are small and haven't grown up that much, they belong, when I'm the king, they belong in my kingdom next to me. Now, I want you to just get the picture. He says kingdom. We all think of, the kingdom of God, and it's this kind of thing that we're a part of, and No, Jesus is in a time, he says, in my kingdom. He's saying, I am the king of this earth and ruler, and when I rule, and my rule is in its fullness, which you might think, well, then that's when we'll have the chariots, and we'll have the tanks, and we'll have the palaces, and we'll have the money. And Jesus says, my kingdom will be marked by children being fully welcomed in it, the same as you adults. Now, we understand this in a way that I think probably as a church, I'm proud of our understanding of the gravitas related to the nature of children and the burden and responsibility to love them. I mean, we have an excellent children's ministry. We make sure that they have their own space, that their bodies are here, that they know they're welcomed. We talk to them in their language. We do all types of things. We have this amazing program. Every time you're here, it's a hallmark of our church. Like, I think they talked about it before I came out here. Did they say something about kids? It's all the time. But could it be that we've got this section in our mind where this is all it takes, but somehow they walk out and we could hand them something that from that moment on is hindering them from connection with God? Jesus is making room for excluded bodies. He's saying everyone is welcome. Don't hinder anyone from connection with me. Now, these are the first statistics. This is the first one. Like, this is it. Unprecedented. Came out in 2007. Kids born in 2002 and 2003. 5 years old, 8 years old. They got a screen in 2010, right? That's when they got it. And now the data is out. And so you have to understand, like, I am not, like I said, I'm not up here going, oh, you come to my house and we are just like, we got it all squared away. No phones, no nothing. We're battling through this. We didn't know. We had our kids on iPads and got them iPads. But here's the reality. We didn't know, but now we know. Okay, this is where the Christian, we need to be alert, right? We need to understand where the potential problems are. We need to be able to identify real things that can cause real problems to our very real and precious children and to our homes. So it's our job to now go, okay, new information, new decision. Ding. Period. How do we respond? And this is how I'm gonna start to lead us through this. So you hear the data, read the book, there's way more, it's widespread. We'll talk about all different types of implications, and I'm gonna give us some tools. But let me orient us first to how we go through this, our disposition, our approach to adjusting to this type of a problem in the world that we live in. One of the easy things to do when we locate or identify a real problem is to go to all or nothing thinking. And that's easy. Right? I know there's some guys in here, it's a problem, and it's normal, right? Like guys are like, I wanna protect, I wanna defend, I wanna build a boundary, let's go. Let's make this safe and good and roar. And if there's a problem, let's go take that thing out. Let's just get out the double loaded barrel, let's take it out, right? And so some people hear this and they're like, no Wi-Fi in our house, no cars, you better be good or I'm gonna turn back the electricity off again. I mean, it's like, you can get to this place where you go extreme. And can I just, that's not healthy. That's not helpful. All right, that's not helpful. And there's a philosophical approach and how Christ moves into different cultures and different times and different ways. And we got the light bulb, people. We're not gonna get rid of it. All right, so how are we gonna manage all of this? You see, there does need to be for some people, when there's addiction, when there's serious problems, hard, fast, detox, boundaries, when it gets to a certain level. But what if we could, in a healthy way, kind of start to move towards a more healthy reality before it gets to the extremes? You see, the way that kind of evil and unhealthy things move into our life is just one little step at a time, one little step at a time, one little step at a time. And we're comfortable with the little steps, because if they went from A all the way to W, then we would go, that's too much. But if they go A, B, C, D, E, then eventually we're comfortable with one step at a time, but over time it's everything. And so part of backing out of a problem is to go, can we just start to move in the right direction and think of it the opposite way? That we may not fix it all today, but if we start to move in the right direction every single day, eventually we'll cover a very large boundary and we'll be headed in a new direction. It's easy to just try to say, I'm gonna cut it all off, but this doesn't help people with how to figure it out. One of the examples of this, and this is why the responsibility for the church is so important, is growing up in the 90s, there was what was called purity culture. All right, and purity culture was this idea that, sexual immorality is the worst, most horrific thing you could ever do. And what they did, and I was a part of it, was they scared sex out of you. It was like, I am so afraid to have sex. I don't even want to talk about sex. Sex is evil. Just to think about evil, it's all bad. And all that did was not teach kids what's good and what to move towards. It's all bad, and therefore a lot of people went into their marriages out of the purity culture thinking, I don't even understand what sex is because the whole thing feels bad. There are people that I've talked to in my office who feel bad having sex with their spouse because they learned for 10 years that everything about sex was bad. So this is not a healthy approach. You have to have not just prohibition, things you're not allowed to do, but a vision. What is it? They didn't spend time saying, here's the vision for your marriage. Here's the vision for intimacy. This is what it's all about. This is where life comes. It was fear-based, and therefore it made people spring out of the church. Because if you lead with fear, eventually you will become feared. So we lead with love. And we don't have this all or nothing thinking. It's kind of like Daniel in the Old Testament, right? He gets brought into this foreign land, and it's not God's land. It's not the place that God wants him to be, but there he is. And he makes concessions. He engages in the community. He engages in the life of the king. He lives there. He learns the language. He becomes one of the wisest people there. He's part of them. But then when they ask him to cross boundaries related to his faith, he says no. And that's what the book of Daniel is about, that God is going to ultimately be with us, because this is the passage that in the end of it, there's a vision of Jesus coming on the clouds, and that's what he says when he gets crucified. It's a passage from Daniel, and it's all about his presence being with us just like he was in the fire. And so we don't go all or nothing, right? What we do is we do the more difficult, but more fruitful way of leading. Because what we ultimately want with our kids, and now this may be somewhat of an opinion, but I believe it to be true. We want to teach them to manage the potential problems themselves. We want them to understand the problem and to genuinely, by their own motivation, by their own acceleration, move towards the beautiful things that life has. Because people are existential sharks. They're gonna move in the water. Our job is to help them move towards the right things and help them find a path. This video struck a chord with me. I think it will for you too.
Whoa. Ooh. Huh?
If we don't step in somehow as parents to help us kind of steer them, right, then we become part of the problem. If we just let them engage fully, then what we're doing is we're hindering them. We're part of the problem. So I want you to consider a couple things as you respond to this. Consider the truth. Phones aren't all bad, and our kids will use them. That's the truth. They're not all bad. I want you to view your phone differently as a result of this series, like a tool. Like if you go to my garage, I have a big toolbox like this tall, all these drawers, and then I have a table. But if you look at my table, you'd be like, whoa, what a mess. Because all my favorite tools are just in a pile on the table. Because I don't want to go get them all the time. I use them all the time, and they're just right there. So I get them all the time. But if you looked at my table, you wouldn't be like, well, this is the best thing Joel has. It looks like it's in a pile of junk. No, it's just there when I need it for what I need it for. That's what we need to kind of move towards. That it's just a tool that doesn't run our lives, but when we need it, we can use it, but we don't let it drag us through life. You need to remove all or nothing thinking from your mind. You got to remove that. A lot of people don't lead or teach that way because nuance can be really difficult, and it's easy to rally a group around black and white. But I don't think it's helpful. I want to help. Remove all or nothing thinking. Don't do anything dramatic or out of anger. Don't do that. Think. Pray. Take a week and just pray. Just look at the phone and say, what kind of hold do you have on my life? And then what you're gonna do is over the next coming weeks and in your own dialogues, you're gonna figure out a path that is healthy to use now into the future. And I use the word path very specifically. It's not just one rule. It's not just one set of parameters. It's not just something you talk about once. It's a new pathway with a new direction. One of the things that we tell our kids that, and I am so passionate about, is I tell them, fall in love with something that has nothing to do with the screen. And so we see our kids like falling in love with these things they enjoy doing. And that's the goal, right? You want your kid to fall in love with basketball or football or horseback riding. You just want them to love that. Like our daughter loves horses and loves horseback riding. We're not gonna be able to pay for it, but like, fine, fall in love with it. Like, I don't know. Like I tell her all the time that she needs to marry an orthopedic surgeon. So I'm praying for that. But figure out a pathway. And then this is very important. Be ready to do the same things that you ask your kids to do, or at least 80% of it. You see, we need to parent our kids. We need to engage with them. I will tell you that I believe that you should share every piece of data that you can in this book with your, don't hold it back. You don't need to, you're not gonna scare them. I've shared everything. Here's the data. Here's what's going on. Let's figure out a pathway forward. And we're working on that. And then you need to self-parent. You need to take some time and just move outside of yourself, look down and go, what would you say to yourself about your use of your phone? If you were looking at it objectively and looking at it with the best interest. The scriptures tell us that we are supposed to throw off everything that hinders us. In Hebrews chapter 12, there's this magnificent passage where we're talking about all of the great men and women who have lived and done specific things, acts, movement in their life that is renowned throughout history, things we talk about today. Abraham and Isaac. That move was so radical in terms of its faith that it's remembered forever. And Abraham did that, and he trusted God. And it says that since we are being watched by those that did big things, do big faith things, you do it too. Go and make some steps. Go and take some action in your life. You're surrounded by all these that have experienced, they're in the trophy case of heaven for God to go, these ones trusted me, not with just their words, not with just their mind. These ones trusted me with their lives. Be like them. Hebrews chapter 12, therefore, since we are surrounded by this great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders us and our children and the sin that so easily entangles us. And then let us run with perseverance the race. The implications are there's a pathway forward. Define it. Fill it with God's vision. Fill it with something great. And throw off the things that are getting in the way of that. And as we start to piece all that together, I think we'll figure out some great steps that we can take to manage this very, very real problem. So let's take a minute and let's pray. Lord, help us to know what it is that we're supposed to throw away, that we're supposed to get rid of, that we're supposed to make adjustments from. Help us to think, be smart, and have our feet on the ground and make practical decisions. Help us to be honest, God. and to evaluate self and the problems that we may be having with our phones. And help this church to become a community with a culture that says, we're not gonna let this thing steal our attention. We're gonna give our attention to God. We're gonna give our attention to the good things that God has offered to us, the good and perfect gifts that come from God, and not be swayed. Lord, I pray that this would be the catalyst for some healthy discussions in the car on the way home throughout the week, and that we could do some things that really do purify and cleanse us from some of these tremendous problems. We love you and we worship you. Thank you. In Jesus' name, amen.